to transition just for a moment, because you mentioned you go from the magnetic points to magnetic preaching. That's the appendix that you put on the book. Let's talk about that for a moment. How do we preach these points? I mean, they don't necessarily lend necessarily, you have chapter and verse. I mean, you actually do chapter and verse, but it's such a, the points are such that when you describe them, there's not a verse that actually just says
no
totality.
No.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So because people go Christ-centered, God-centered, they like, why do I need to know all this culture
I mean,
stuff?
it would be the most boring preaching if every week you thought, oh, I need to talk about a magnetic point. The way I think it works in preaching is, and let's take our example from the Puritans. The Puritans had these preaching applicatory grids where, you can preach this passage and here are 16 ways that you could apply it. And, it was a kind of a way of applying the text well. I think we should use the magnetic points like that in our study as we're preparing. And for me, that would be kind of week to week exposition going through a book would be, okay, in this passage in front of me, not that this is a foreign alien structure, but as it comes out of the text, because the Bible is talking about people and it's about, that these points are, what might be one of the magnetic points what might be the itch here that can be scratched? You wouldn't talk about it being a magnetic point, but it's a framework that you can then, like a scaffold, which you can take the scaffold down. And I think, that people do, Keller has his own version of it. Piper, I'm trying to find this bit where Piper was saying about, he has his version of people ask the same kinds of questions, that kind of idea. So I think it would be a help to preaching, knowing our congregation to know, okay, this passage in front of me, what might be the magnetic point here that I could hit? Not that you mention it, but it could just be a helpful framework, just like those Puritan preaching grids used to be.
Now that we have, let's say that we take these magnetic points. Being a ministry leader, I want to go, how do I then incorporate this in my church? And it may or may not fit. But I'm thinking of people coming in on a Sunday morning. And again, I was in a context where people would come on a Sunday morning. I know that other places, that's not happening. Where do you find, or how do you go about building those relationships? How do you find the connecting points to present the connecting points?
So I think the first thing there, this is answering the question, but taking a step back, is back to helping the congregation, equipping the congregation in discipleship in their own lives, but also as a church. So what I'm encouraging people to do is take the book, read the book as a group, as a church, and say, okay, in our local area, how are people answering those magnetic points? What are the big, what are the how are they scratching those itches that they have? And then I think already, just as Paul wandered around the objects of worship, what are the versions of the unknown God in your community? And then, then it's finding a way of then resonating or building the bridge that you've been talking about into the community, to be able to go where people are and where those magnetic points really resonate in their own friendships and lifestyle, but also I think in the ministries that you want to do in terms of, when Keller in Center Church talks about a theological vision, it's that idea of how do you kind of, what does the gospel mean in your particular area contextualized? And I think that could be things that you want to do formally and informally within the church. But it's also about equipping the saints for good works, helping them think, be magnetic. So I think again, it's just a helpful framework. The problem is that I think we need the programmatic kind of, people are suspicious of programmatic stuff increasingly. And this is about wisdom. This is about being flexible. This is about knowing the gospel in your life so well that you can talk about Christ in a way that resonates and might touch on one of those magnetic points with others. So I think my answer is this idea that evangelism follows discipleship. As pastors, we're wanting the body to self-grow. We're wanting to teach people well, that they have a solid faith, that they're magnetized. And then I do think if people are magnetized, that will attract others in their life, in what they're doing. Of course, if we're only doing church stuff all the time, then we have no chance to interact with those outside the church. And I know that that's a problem as well. And of course, we model that from the top in our churches as well.